Perhaps McFarlane didn't get the memo to proofread the bio on the back of the trading cards before shipping them. One of the biggest demands for McFarlane collectors since the release of the Dark Knight Trilogy last year, Lucius Fox and the Tumbler finally make their debut. However, as McFarlane Toy Store exclusives and bundled together under the Gold Label. But is it really worth the $100? We're gonna start with Lucius Fox, the simplest of the bunch, since he is in fact a 7-inch DC Multiverse figure as far as scaling, proportion, articulation, and the works. But he's probably also going to be the easiest to cover since it is in fact just Lucius Fox, which means that this is yet another figure sporting the suit kind of demeanor, the suit plan out as far as the clothing, as far as the actual schematics and such. And you know how I feel about certain figures that are designed with a suit in mind. There's sometimes restrictions on the articulation, the way that the overall figure is constructed. There's some limitations where I'm like, yeah, it's not going to blow anybody's socks off as far as making the grade for a figure for posability and such. It's mainly just there to kind of fill in a void for a character that you probably wanted a figure to be made out of. So should there be a Commissioner Gordon a la the Gary Oldman version, that would be neat, but at the same time, I'm already anticipating that he's just going to be a dude in a suit, just like Two-Face was a dude in a suit. So when they announced that they were going to be making Lucius Fox, I was like, okay, I mean, that's interesting, and I understand that the likeness is going to be kind of 50-50 since McFarlane has always gotten this trend where when they tackle a real-life person, a real-life likeness, there's always that kind of strange balance of caricature and actual accuracy. But I'm going to jump a little ahead and say that this is probably one of the finest ones they've done. Often they lean a little bit towards something, like I said, a caricature, something that a sketch artist would draw that resembles Christian Bale, resembles Aaron Eckhart as Two-Face, but they have some exaggerated features that make it look, like I said, like a cartoon version of that actor. Here, I really don't see that too much. I really don't feel the need to go the mile of labeling it as a caricature. It actually looks like Morgan Freeman. It actually has the little nuances and details, even like I said, the freckles, but on top of that, the overall aesthetic and the look of Morgan Freeman, complete with the flat top hair. It's actually a really nice portrayal of the actor as Lucius Fox. The only thing that I think kind of leans a little bit towards that caricature side would have to be maybe a little bit of puffiness around the cheeks, but outside of that, that's actually pretty spot on in my opinion, at least for a McFarlane Toys. Once you kind of comb over the suit, however, that's where things get just a little rudimentary, nothing terrible, nothing bad, but just come what you'd expect. This is the suit that he primarily wears when he shows Batman some brand new toys after his request for a much more agile suit after his altercation with Scarecrow in the van at the beginning of the movie and those dogs. So he wanted to be able to turn his head, and so finally Lucius is good enough to show off a few of those goods, but not before reading the instructions first. And this is ideally that suit, although if my memory doesn't fail me, he kind of brought back that suit again for the ending when he helps out Batman with the sonar device during the climax. So this is mainly the suit that he wears in those two appearances, and overall it's actually a pretty good representation. I like the color clash of the dark blue with the lighter blue, baby blue, for the inside shirt right there, the bow tie with kind of a amalgamation of blue hues right there that really contrasts very well. Then we get the pants where the color is just a little off-putting, but it is technically accurate. So I guess that's more of a remark on Lucius's sense of style more than anything else. But in terms of portrayal, you still got some pretty good texture work, wrinklage, as if that's even a word, but the wrinkle effects to make it look like an article of clothing. But like I said, nothing that I can really comment on that really hasn't been said about any other character that sports a sort of suit. The only thing that I'm just a little bit on the fence, I don't really feel too much against it, especially since once you get to articulation, you'll see where I'm coming from, but it's always a little off-putting to see that half of the figure is conjoined to the coat itself as opposed to the other half, so there's always that degree of separation that kind of attracts the eye from a presentation standpoint going on right here in the middle of the chest. But if there's a silver lining to that, it would have to be that the coat itself is made out of a much squishier material that doesn't feel so rigid, and it's definitely going to favor things when we finally get to posing the character, which is not necessarily a most in-demand factor of the figure since, again, it's Lucius Fox. I'm not expecting this guy to be the most posable and the most intricate guy when it comes to joints and articulation. Might be a symptom of the way that the overall head is sculpted with the extra bits for the hair, as well as, like I said, the puffiness of the cheeks, but it did manage to grab onto the joint a little too tight to the point where it's actually making some audible squeaking. So do mind that when you pull yours out of the box, but technically you can still rotate the head full 360, except, like I said, it's gonna come at the cost of feeling just a little squeaky. So I might have to give mine a little bit of an extra blow with a hair dryer or some extra hot water to loosen that up a little bit. Could have favored a few extra degrees going downwards, but looking upwards and side to side and inclining it left and right is not too bad. Then you get to the top arm joints that are fully able to rotate 360 due to the cutout of the coat right there. Extension towards the sides is also pretty decent. A full T-pose 180 degrees right about right there. No form of swiveling, except there's just a little bit of shrugging motion found on the right one, but it doesn't seem like that was intended. It just seems like there's extra room for the joint to kind of move right there on mine. Then you do get the bicep swivels that are fully able to rotate 360, two joints at the elbow that are fully able to bend all the way up. And one little interesting note that I may have to skip a little ahead for here, you do have wrist joints that are pretty much identical to that of other figures that you've seen in the past out of the DC Multiverse line, fully able to rotate the wrist 360 degrees via the peg, as well as being able to bend inwards and outwards via the hinge. Except, what I wanted to comment on is that I noticed that they kind of chiseled and sculpted the cuff of the suit a little lower to the point where the wrist joints are a little bit more exposed. I don't know if that's like a tailoring choice that they made, because that's technically accurate to the much more exposed wrists that Morgan Freeman's tailoring of the suit had in the movie. But in my opinion, I think it's kind of a happy accident, because it does favor the wrist joints a little bit more than the often criticized suited figure that I've always commented about. I've always mentioned how whenever I get a figure that is of a character that's wearing a suit like this, one of the biggest things that get hit the most as far as articulation, one of the biggest victims or trade-offs, there is a trade-off, would have to be the wrists and the ankle joints, because often the cuffs and the lining of the suit and the pants would often restrict those joints. And they're technically there, and they could technically still move, because nothing as far as schematics is concerned has been changed, but the suit is just going to keep that from happening. Doesn't seem like it's 100% the case right here, as far as the wrists are concerned at least, because jumping a little ahead to the ankles, it is a bit more restrictive, but you can tell that they try to add some wiggle room, because the plastic or the rubberized plastic that you get as part of the pants here towards the bottom are a little bit more, like I said, squishier. It's kind of similar to that of the coat, where I found the coat itself to feel a little bit more squishy and less rigid. Overall, the pants is made out of this very hard or very durable rubberized plastic, but once you get down to where the ankles are at, I do feel like it's a little squishier than your typical suited suit. So I feel like that was an effort to try to make the ankle articulation a bit more feasible, but just still not as good as that of the suit. But I think the only other outcome, or the only other option to have done at that point, is to then raise the cuffs of the pants, and then it'll look a little awkward. So I kind of understand where they were coming from there. Nevertheless, the ankle joints are still, in fact, there. They're regular ball joints, so you can only pivot the ankle downwards and upwards only about that far, as you can see right there. And technically, they can still rotate in place 360 degrees. Just do be careful with the way that the hinge inside is cut. And at the same time, you can still kind of incline and pivot the foot inwards and outwards, but just mind the way that the pants is overall sculpted around said ankle joint. Now, I mentioned how awkward this area right here seemed with the torso because of the way that the upper body is conjoined with the coat, but at least the advantage is that, and you kind of need this, Lucius Fox is a pretty flexible guy, even at his age, because this torso articulation is pretty remarkable. You have this mid-torso cut that can fully rotate 360 degrees, so you'll notice that the middle piece right there is rotating along with the waist. I'll go ahead and just jump ahead a little bit right here. You'll notice that the waist can also rotate the full 360, but then both the mid-torso and the waist can crunch pretty decently and give you pretty much that far. So we're not even taking the legs into account. This is just the overall torso that is crunching inwards like so, and then extension towards the back can go as far, I feel like it can go even farther, but it's because of the coat that it's kind of rubber banding itself back into place right there because of the way that it's sculpted and kind of encompassing the whole back area right here. But I feel like it could, if it wasn't for that, it would go farther. And then crunching from side to side and overall swiveling like so. You can see that right there. It is pretty good. And it never feels like I'm kind of stretching or stressing any of the joints. It's a little bit of squeaking, but it's not because of the style. It's because of the coat right here kind of rubbing up against the leg plastic right there. So it's actually a pretty astounding amount of torso articulation, and I feel like they kind of needed that because of the functionality he's going to have with the Tumbler later on. And then taking further into account that functionality later, you do have the top leg joints that can fully extend upwards and almost at a full 90-degree angle forwards like so. And then extension towards the back is also a little bit on the extra side, even though it does allow a little bit of gappage happening there at the top of the leg. It does look like the crotch piece, or the diaper piece if you want to call it there, despite some slight enlargement of said diaper piece. If you look underneath the coat, it does a good job of kind of masking it, because it does look like they kind of oversized it to allow a little bit of that extra slack, which is, again, beneficial for the functionality he's going to have with the Tumbler, but from a visual standpoint, it does look a little ugly, so try not to pay too much attention towards the back. It's mostly from the front, and keep in mind that this is Lucius Fox. He is kind of going on his 70s, so if he wants to wear some extra oversized, saggier clothing for comfortability, let him. He's earned his keep. Nevertheless, you can still extend said legs almost at the full 180. Jesus Christ, look at this. I mean, this is Morgan Freeman. This is the legend himself, after all. He's earned the right to be able to do this. Look at that. That is crazy. The full 180-degree extension towards the sides right there, as the legs have allowed. And then, of course, two joints at the knee that, despite the cutting of the sculpting, can allow full bending almost all the way up like so. And then I've already commented on the ankles, and furthermore, you can bend the toes upwards like so on both feet. So nothing really lost right there. So yeah, the articulation is pretty standard, the basic 22 points, but it's the execution of the mid-torso and the legs that they at least got right, and they needed to, because of the way that Lucius Fox is really intended to be paired with, and that is with the Tumbler and showcasing it to Bruce Wayne himself. But like I mentioned before, he's sporting the outfit from The Dark Knight, in which he's not just showcasing certain features for the Tumbler, but also for his new suit and a couple of other little added doodads, especially before the Hong Kong extraction scene. So McFarlane did in fact decide to toss him in with a couple of accessories, one of which he technically already has on person, which is a little OCD triggering, and that's going to be on the right hand. You'll notice that despite having two mostly neutral hands, one of them does sport what seems to be some kind of electronic device. My brain immediately went towards being the phone that has the little decrypting device, the phone that he's going to leave behind inside of the Hong Kong building to be able to scramble all of the little signals and the electricity inside of the building. That's what I assumed it was because of its size. But then I was just a little bit extra perplexed when I noticed that inside of one of the baggies inside the box, he comes with an extra one. And trust me, none of these things are fully detailed. In fact, this one is just a few degrees away from being a hunk of plastic. In fact, when it kind of dropped out of the baggie, I thought that this was a piece that broke off the other accessories that I'm about to show. So I was like, all right, what exactly is this? But then I noticed a slight little indent on top of one of the sides that kind of resembles that of a camera. So I'm like, all right, is this meant to be the phone? But at the same time, it's a different size. It's much bigger than that of the one on his right hand, except the one on the right hand is fully plastered and really strongly put inside of that right hand. It's not coming out. It's permanent. Whereas this one is loose and can technically fit into his left neutral gripping hand that he has on person right there. So you can kind of mix and match, but of course, if you don't want it to look awkward, like he's holding two different phones in both hands, he comes with an extra pair of swappable hands. On his right, he's going to come with an extended hand that he can either use to hold something in place or put it on his hip or just have it be relaxed. So a little bit to kind of get rid of that stagnant, permanent cell phone that he has on the right hand and the right gripping hand. And then on the left is my personal favorite, the pointing hand, the much wise, indicative pointing hand with the index finger to kind of tell off Bruce Wayne or to kind of point at a specific gadget or button or function inside of the Tumbler, or just make it look like he's an idiot and point to his head like Morgan Freeman often uses with his charisma. And you can use this hand to have him point at the armament crate that he comes bundled with, which is the only other accessory that makes this guy kind of an exclusive, kind of like a very specific thing to the Tumbler set, which is this gray box that is mostly hollowed out. As you notice right here, it's pretty much half empty, so that's a little bit of a of a downside. It kind of makes the thing feel just a tinge cheap, McFarlane. Just a FYI, I kind of wish that it had a very solid bottom, so that's a little bit of a bummer. Unless, if you're going to do something like this, at least include like 2 pegs right there to store the extra hands so that you can plug them in and have them be kind of encased right there, so that whenever you move this, you can also move the hands along with it, because that would be incredibly beneficial and a very nice plus, especially for a figure that is very loose like this, that doesn't come with its own DC Multiverse box to put into the plastic shells. So since he only came in baggies, it would be nice to have this be kind of like its own little storage unit. But it is nonetheless not a storage unit. It's simply just for show, because when you remove the lid, which is loose and unfortunately not hinged to any sides of the box itself, you then have this little detail, this panel inside that sports an awful lot of the gadgets and utilities that Batman uses, including the utility belt itself, the grapple, some of the batarangs, some of the compartments. I don't really see anything else in there. Smoke grenades, couple of other little doodads, such and such. And they're very well painted and sculpted, except, like I said, nothing to really write home about. None of them can really be detached or moved or anything like that. It's simply just for dress, for show. And from a distance, it actually looks pretty badass. It's once you look up close that you're like, okay, well, I mean, it's not terrible, but some extra paint applications, etc., could have been used, or at least to add a little bit of detail to hinge the lid would have been a nice little plus. But in my opinion, the most desired thing would have been to benefit the extra spacing at the bottom right here, to then include a couple of like little pegs or grips or just something to put the hands as well as the extra cell phone piece inside, and that would have come a long way in my opinion. However, that's not the star of the show. The star of the show is to have Lucius demonstrate what we are most definitely interested in. And here it is, the beast itself. And yes, Mr. Wayne, it does come in black. The Tumbler. Probably the most demanded, the most sought after thing that we were all kind of asking ourselves, is McFarlane going to do it? Are they finally going to release a Tumbler? Most definitely after they did in fact do their 2 renditions, one initial kind of pre-alpha one and then the revision for the 89 2-pack of the Keaton Batmobile. After that, I think we were all immediately gravitating towards either the Batman Forever vehicle or the Tumbler. I don't think there was any other that came close as far as demand, as far as people speculating, as far as leaks. Like, are they ever going to make a Tumbler? And finally it was here, but it just looks like an awful lot of that hype died down when this was initially revealed. And now, even though I do from time to time come across a post on Reddit saying that people finally got theirs, they're probably been like posing with it, mixing and matching, but I might bring myself to be a little forward here in calling myself just, you know, a bit of a brave soul, and being the first to say, I'm not sure that I'm 100% feeling the Tumbler by McFarlane, even though it's still a pretty respectable outing for the middle tier pricing, because obviously, if you want something that's a bit more on the realistic side, proportionate side, something that's just very high caliber, it really does boil down to Hot Toys, because anything lower than that, then you're looking at like die-cast models, either from Jada Toys with the 1/18th or 1/24th scale, and then your only other options are, of course, the little micro machines with the likes of Hot Wheels, or if you're willing to put in a little bit of the effort and time, some kind of model kit by companies like Moto King or the like. So this is now finally able to check that box for people who are consuming 7-inch figures that are similar to that you find in the stores, except, like I said, it's locked behind, I don't want to call it a paywall, but this massive gate that is called McFarlane Toy Store exclusivity. And I feel like maybe that would have been okay, but I'm not 100% certain if that was a right call, while also marking it at an $100 price tag, because one thing that I always want to really break down and boil down to is exactly where the money is going to as far as these bundles are concerned. Because if he's going to be bundled in with Lucius Fox, we have to take into account that he is at a 7-inch figure. He's probably going to be marked around the $20 to $22.99 price tag. So let's go ahead and take that out of the equation. That means that 100 minus those 20-ish or so bucks, let's lowball it for a second there. The Tumbler is then considered to be an $80 figure. And frankly, I'm just not sure if it really meets that price tag, because upon initial impressions, I was a little worried that he's going to be a little flattened, a little disproportionate because of how narrow the box surprisingly came out of the shipper. It was actually a pretty narrow box. I was like, how did they manage to come? I understand that they had that little gag in Batman Begins where he fits into the compact parking, but at the same time, I didn't want McFarlane to take it a little too literally. So pulling it out of the box, I did notice that an awful lot of the superficial details are definitely impressive as far as making sure that it feels like it is in fact a Tumbler, whether it be the side paneling, the way that everything is just kind of congregated together right here to give it that very amorphous look that the designers took inspiration from, which is to mix a Humvee, a military tank, and then a little bit of Lamborghini DNA and fuse it all together to bring us essentially what is the prototype of the Tumbler. And so I see an awful lot of the inspiration happening on the sides right here. This is arguably my favorite part of the vehicle itself, is actually all of these areas and these panels and the details and the molding that's happening with the side profile of the vehicle itself, whether it be like these exhaust ports on the side, the paneling with a little bit of piston detail going on here on the back, and then of course, in my opinion, something that I always felt McFarlane excelled at, which is to give it that airbrush look, which you can see an awful lot of that happening on the panels. You can see the scrapes and the details that are meant to be intentional. So it's not like the actual paint came off the vehicle itself, but rather they intended it to give it that metallic look. And I feel like for the most part, they nailed it. And then breaking apart from the black aesthetic, you'll notice that you have a few kind of this, I don't want to call it copper, but this kind of muted brownish gold, slightly muted gold paint decals happening alongside some of the details here, like these little circular pieces here by the window, or the overall contraptions that are holding up the vents, which sadly are not articulated. I feel like that could have been a nice little touch to amplify the little bit of quality behind the Tumbler, but sadly none of these flaps are really articulated. They are a little flexible as far as malleability, but they're not meant to be articulated or switched or moved over, so do be careful, because otherwise if you flex it far enough, you risk warping or damn near breaking the thing. So that's a little bit of a bummer, and that's just kind of, like I said, it's a firm example as to where they almost hit the mark as far as developing a really good Tumbler vehicle for a range that goes from 6 to 7 inch figures, but it just misses just shy of that. And I'm noticing a little bit of a trend with McFarlane vehicles as of late. And the Flash vehicle, at least that first outing, kind of hit all of those stepping stones where you have this nicely sculpted piece of plastic, and the pricing didn't really hurt that much because that thing was marked at $60. So you kind of took what you could get and you thought to yourself, all right, for $60 it's not too bad. But now that we're escalating towards the $100 mark and the quality is not necessarily elevated all that much, because once I'm able to look past the detailings of the paneling, like I said, the sculpt work happening on either side right here that kind of, like I said, kind of matches the aesthetic of the Tumbler and kind of reminisces back to the cool chase sequences from both Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And to me, one of my other favorite little details are the windows right here that are very faithful to the look of the movie itself. It starts to kind of have this feel of me just holding a very giant blocky piece of plastic in my hand. And I understand a lot of you are probably like, well, David, it's a toy. It's McFarlane Toys. At $100, we need to start. It's kind of like the whole McDonald's mentality where you guys are raising the price, but it's still McDonald's. Why are we raising the price then? Are you using better quality beef? Are you using better lettuce? Are you giving us more portion, bang for a buck? No, then don't blame us when we start asking questions. Especially when a few of my fears about proportioning and flattening actually do become a little realized when you look at the front. It's actually one of the things that became a bit more apparent when initial in-hand photos start to get released. This middle part right here, yeah, it's, in my opinion, just as bad as it looked like in some of those photos. I was really hoping that I could say otherwise when seeing it here firsthand, pulling it out of the box. But no, this part is still a little bit ugly. It feels like I'm sorry for this analogy, but when you're trying to draw something that you're trying to kind of replicate from real life. So let's say you're looking at, you're trying to paint a portrait of somebody, but then you mess up one thing and that just causes the next thing to get a little worse, and then the next thing to get a little worse. And it's like that horse meme where it starts beautifully drawn, but then somewhere down the line, it just turns into like this terrible looking, happy face, 5-year-old drew it type of sketch. That's kind of what's happening here as we work from the back towards the front, where these things need to be a little bit closer together to kind of give it, like I said, that much more funneled down Lamborghini look. And it just never really translates in this scale. I don't know what exactly happened, but just something here goes wrong to where this thing is just a little bit too wide, but the middle part right here with the teeth, or the mouth if you want to call it, where Batman kind of slunks in order to be able to go into that kind of much more, I don't know what mode to call it, but where he's got better control of the vehicle and he's able to navigate in a very stealthy kind of way. This whole area is just way too narrowed down to where it needs to be a bit more proportionate to the wheels that you have here by the side. And that in turn then kind of brings our attention to some really empty, I guess you could call it negative space on the vehicle here on the front. Sure, you got some nice little details of that, like I said, that copper aesthetic with the little pieces that are here by the side of the wheel, or on the inside where it kind of looks like they're trying to emulate this piston-like look to just give it some added details, some added life. But once you look at the areas around, it's just plastic. It's just black plastic. There's no panelings. There's no wires. There's nothing airbrushed. There's nothing. There's frankly nothing right there. There's just this empty gap of nothing. And like I said, it just kind of lends to that feel, especially when you flip the vehicle over and you just notice just nothing underneath. There's barely a handful of little details that just kind of makes me feel like I'm holding a piece of plastic. And I feel like I felt like I was holding a Batmobile more when I was holding the Flash Keaton Batmobile from last year than I do with this guy. Even though from a distance, like I said, I like the aesthetic and the visual flair of what's going on here on the side, as well as the little vents that kind of lift up from the top of the canopy. But once we kind of navigate over here, and like I said, I'm trying to get a feel for the vehicle, it falls flat, which is a shame considering how faithful and accurate the wheels are. I love the detail on the treading, the actual quality of the rubber feels nice, and they feel pretty flat and pretty girthy and steady on a flat surface like you see before you right here. And like I said, they're accurate because not only do you get the much more thinner but more tactical and much more versatile ones here on the front, but then you got the very robust monster truck looking ones on the back. And quite frankly, the back part of this entire vehicle is my favorite, considering just how accurate it is to the movie itself. Because of the thicker wheels, you got 4 wheels, 2 conjoined here, 2 conjoined there. They move in unison. They feel very nice. Would have appreciated a little bit more paint decal on the rims themselves, but overall they are meant to be black, so I guess that's just me kind of, wishful thinking. But then you get to the actual jet engine right here where you have this nice little copper detailing on the outer rim. Would have appreciated a little bit of extra, like I said, airbrushing and make it look like it's been used, like actual fire has emulated from there. So that's probably something that some customizers online, whether it be on Twitter or subreddit, are probably going to take their tools to, and I'm curious to see what they're going to be able to come up with. But then you have this piece right here on top to kind of give it, like I said, some added detail. And I think one of the other things that helps me realize this as probably my favorite part of the vehicle itself is because beyond these vents right here, you have the majority of the space being completely encapsulated by the wheels, which definitely obstructs the vision from me noticing, once again, how slightly empty and negative the spacing is of the plastic underneath here. Even though in an ironic twist of fate, you actually do have some like oxygen tanks or fuel tanks. Actually, yeah, it's likelier that there are the fuel tanks to be able to, power this whole entire thing, because it's going to need like 6 or 7 of them to be able to even get a decent amount of mileage to be able to go cross country with this thing. Because holy shit, I can only imagine the mileage per gallon that this thing can actually operate on regular fuel, let alone diesel, especially with the cost these days. But you'll notice that if you look a little carefully, you have those fuel tanks on the inside right here. But again, ironic that they're completely covered up by this massive row of giant monster truck wheels, whereas the thinner wheels on the front are not doing shit all to be able to cover up the negative space. I feel like something here was completely overlooked. And that's the things, like there's just so many little things here and there, apart from the trading cards bio having a massive typo in it, that feel overlooked and lends to the theory that maybe, just maybe, it looks like McFarlane was quick to act on this set, whether it be for customer demand or because he had Comic-Con coming up and he wanted to make sure that this guy hit people's porches when shipping from the McFarlane Toys website before he managed to get to the event. But many were pleased just to find out one peculiar detail that McFarlane later confirmed leading up to its pre-order launch, which is that this vehicle was going to be, much like in the movie it was, a two-seater, which means it needs to function properly to seat two 7-inch figures along with the Lucius Fox that he comes bundled with. Otherwise, that whole bundling mechanic just doesn't work. It's moot. So, in order to be able to get the canopy popping, you press the button that's on top of the mouth right here, which is probably why it's so narrow in the first place. They probably didn't want to make it so easy to tab, so easy to hint, because when you do so, the spring that they actually incorporated into the canopy lift itself, the lid, is pretty strong. I'm actually pretty surprised and pretty impressed by how they were able to string that in there and make it so strong to be able to give it that amount of strength to pop up. And look who's already waiting for us inside. Lucius Fox, who, spoilers, obviously fits really, really well, almost instantly inside of either seat. Not only the pilot seat, but also the passenger seat right there, where you have the majority of the spacing occurring. So obviously, he's going to be a no-brainer considering how much of a narrower and less cumbersome DC Multiverse 7-inch figure he's going to be. So there's no problems there. Here's the thing though, when lifting this thing and then kind of going back to what I was mentioning about the button and how it's incorporated into this mouth, and probably the reason why the mirrors made it so narrow in order to be able to keep it from any kind of accidental presses, it still happened a number of times where I was just kind of messing with the vehicle, trying to move it, not only within this light box for this review, but even off screen when I was simply just trying to play with it. A number of times my hand would simply just barely press the button and this thing would instantly go flying. So it's a bit on the sensitive side. I don't know if that's a circumstance due to the construction of the button or simply just because of how strong that spring is, but just be mindful of that if you haven't gotten yours already. There's going to be a number of times where you're going to be pressing this button anyways, or maybe it's just my big ass fingers and hands just getting in the way, and it seems to be a skill issue on my part. Getting Lucius out and taking a peek inside of the cockpit itself, you'll notice that, I'm gonna say it again, we're lacking quite a bit of paint decals, sculpting, the works. I mean, again, it's decent, but it still carries on over the little issue that I was having, which is that it really just feels like plastic is in there. I do appreciate a little bit of the faithfulness to the on-screen portrayal of the Tumbler from the inside of the cockpit, whether it be the little ridges or this area right here, this little piece of detailing on the side that's very reminiscent of how it looks like inside of the movie, as well as the seats themselves. And then you have this little computer screen that they tried their best to emulate the way that it looked like in the movie, specifically when he's trying to navigate past traffic during the chase sequence in Batman Begins, where he's trying to get Rachel to safety. And you notice that he's trying to like triangulate the best way to kind of veer off course and make sure that he can escape the guards and make it out of there alive. I do like that little bit of detail right there. But then I look over and I see that steering wheel and just how basic and kind of stamped on there it feels. I don't know. I feel like they could have done a little bit better to construct a much more nicely looking steering wheel. I don't know. I simply just don't know how else to really articulate it, but I just feel like they could have come up with something a bit more creative. It just feels like it's tacked on there, and even though the handles themselves look similar to that of in the movie, I just feel like I'm not asking for like the most finest of details like Hot Toys likes to do in their die-cast models of the Tumbler that they created a couple years back, or most recently their 2.0 of the Batmobile that's shipping to some folks. I'm not expecting anything like that, nothing over the moon, but at the same time, just get a little bit constructive with the molding of the plastic. Sure, maybe cut off a little bit of the paint decals, but the wheel just looks like it's there, just sitting there. And I just wish that something, or maybe even add a hinge so that it's flexible and it can kind of move forwards or backwards to kind of compensate for the spacing, depending on which Batman you want to put inside. Now we're going to start off with probably the one that's going to serve as the ultimate limnus test, which is going to be the original Dark Knight Trilogy Wave Batman. And the reason for that is because he's got the robust rubberized cape right here that could most definitely get in the way and be a problem. So if it could pass the test with this guy, we're probably going to be okay. And with some finagling, you'll see right there that, look at that. Even the one with the rubberized cape, the original Dark Knight Trilogy release of the Bale Batman, does manage to fit in there. Now, does the canopy close? Does the canopy close? Let's make sure. Let's make sure. Look at that. Completely closes. Does that do anything to the figure itself? It does look like the head is bent slightly down by the top, but overall there's a good amount of clearance, so I don't think that we're in any kind of danger as far as warping the ears or doing anything damaging to the figure. And even though he's only able to technically hold the wheel with only one hand, considering that this version of Batman came with only one holding hand and then one fist, and then we didn't get jack off or any kind of extra hand accessories, just the grapple, the batarangs, and that was it. You'll see right here that if he manages to pass the test, then obviously the Tumbler's not going to have any issues holding in either the cloth-caped version that came in the Ultimate Movie 6-pack or the Skyhook version of the Christian Bale Batman that comes with even the unmasked Bale head and, even better, 2 gripping hands, so he's able to hold onto the wheel with 10 and 2 pretty much, or rather 9 and 3, since it's kind of like a horizontal airplane kind of handling to the overall wheel itself. And as you can see right here, it's actually looking pretty nice inside. And despite it being a double-seater and holding both figures together, having Lucius on the side right there with a Batman inside of the Tumbler does definitely make an impression and looks pretty cool as a really nice showpiece. But it leaves a little bit of a sting behind knowing that it's a whopping $100 and you need to be constantly vigilant to make sure that you lock down a pre-order or some kind of order at all on the McFarlane Toy Store website, since it isn't exclusive to the site, which on the one hand is strategically beneficial from a business standpoint for McFarlane, considering that if they don't move that many units, then there's really not too many units to really make, apart from the demand that was definitely reflected by the pre-order sellouts on the first morning of this thing going live, to the point where they even need to take to social media to say, hey, it's going to be later available. It's just that you're going to have to wait till goddamn October for it to actually arrive at your home. And so for those that missed out on, you kind of have like this double-edged sword, this catch-22. You either get too many units to where you have this piece of plastic just kind of laying around and you don't know what to do with it, and therefore it's no longer exclusive and maybe you could find it in different stores, or you make it too exclusive to where it sells out quickly. And like I mentioned before, the pendulum is swinging towards the latter. Except if it's going to be swinging in that direction, the quality needs to match that price point. Because if this thing was maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 to $80, I would be a little bit more lax on it. Especially considering that this is probably going to be our only time to try to get, knock on wood, a Lucius Fox figure with these kind of accessories and a really good, really awesome representation of the Morgan Freeman character from the Dark Knight Trilogy. And the Tumbler, in its black aesthetic, the true and tried Tumbler that Batman uses in the entirety of those films, or at least for the first 2 films, it's cool to see actually have it come to fruition, and I'm definitely glad that I own one. It's just that there were just so many opportunities as far as construction of the plastic, lack of detail, lack of paint-ups, like I said, so much negative space happening towards the front and on the inside of the cockpit that it just could have achieved a little bit more knowing that it's at $100. So for $20 more than the Keaton Batman, you're not really elevating on what that Keaton Batmobile was able to establish. So I'm still left kind of wondering, where does that money go to? Because it's a McFarlane Toy Store exclusive, because I wasn't able to hunt it down at a Macy's out of all places like I was with that Keaton Batmobile last year. It still kind of flabbergasts me a year later that Macy's out of all places had the bulk of the orders for that Batmobile. And who knows, maybe later down the line we could see this guy in brick and mortar stores like Macy's as a standalone thing, or maybe Lucius Fox as a standalone figure. But for now, the bundle is only really worth it if you're a ginormous fan of the Dark Knight Trilogy like I am, and therefore that's what's able to kind of carry me across to being glad that I own it, but just not enough to make me consider picking up the camouflage version, which is an Amazon exclusive. Sure, it's a little on the cheaper side, but you lose out on a figure. You don't have the black aesthetic that matches your Batman characters, and even if you do have the Bane figure, whether it be the Build-A-Figure one that came with the Wave or the standalone gold label that's very hard to come by with the trench coat, you're still dealing with, like I said, a slightly underwhelming tumbler that could have been a lot better. And sure, you got the variances of the added pieces of plastic with the turret gun and stuff there on the top, but to me, it just wasn't worth it that I flat out canceled my pre-order for that guy. And even though I'm still glad that I got this guy and I'm still gonna keep it in my possession for the foreseeable future, I can't bring myself to say that you're missing out on a grand exclusive should you have missed out on the pre-order prior to the sellout. So for now, the bundle in its entirety, I will give it a very solid 7 out of 10. Ironically, the Lucius Fox character figure is able to carry it. The tumbler itself, despite having some cool details of the paneling and the airbrush paint decals, as well as just being able to be a mostly faithful representation of the tumbler that we saw on screen in The Dark Knight in this 7-inch scale format to cater to those figures and actually be a two-seater, there's still enough compromises made that I can't really ignore. And that goes double for that botched biography on the back of the trading card. McFarlane, I'm just letting you know, if you guys are looking for a full-time proofreader that's solely dedicated to make sure that all of your bios on the trading cards are up to par when they get shipped out, I'm available. Just saying. So if you managed to lock down an order for your Tumbler and Lucius Fox double pack, have you received it? If so, where is it right now? Have you displayed it? Do you have it in a certain pose or in a certain display where you're trying to replicate a specific scene? Or are there some of the drawbacks on the vehicle that keep you from really wishing that this is like the ultimate centerpiece to your McFarlane vehicle collection from either of the Batman movies or interpretations of Batman overall? Or do you think that they could have done a little bit better without ever teetering towards Hot Toys, kind of territory? And while you're letting me know, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs down if you didn't, which I'm imagining is going to be a good chunk of you, since I understand full-headed here that I'm going into this as a minority, knowing how I feel about this Tumbler set. But that's just me, and until next time, guys, stay humble. I'll see you later.